I'm going to talk for the next few minutes about the challenges of infant care and feeding. And the importance here is, as we've already discussed, human infants require pretty much continuous care in the first months of life. And we know that advice and expectations about infant care conflict, and moms need guidance to support both care for their infants and care for themselves. And I think this is something that I see so much in the moms I interact with in a clinical setting who have not slept and have not taken care of themselves and have not been able to do anything because they think the only way to be a good mother is to not do any self-care whatsoever. And unfortunately, this is a marathon, not a sprint. And the decision to completely neglect self-care is not a good solution to caring for babies. So we need to help mothers understand that and plan for that and anticipate it. We also know that infant feeding is associated with both short and long-term health outcomes for mothers and infants. We know that most women in the United States very much want to breastfeed, but 2/3 don't reach their personal goals. So we need to do a much better job supporting mothers with infant feeding. So I'm going to talk about a couple of studies that are really interesting. One looked at rigidity of maternal beliefs and postpartum depression symptoms. And they developed a scale to see how rigid mothers were in their interpretation of what made a good mother. And they found that certain things correlated pretty closely with becoming depressed. If a mom believed my baby misbehaves, then others will think I'm a bad mother. That correlated with getting depressed because guess what? Babies don't behave. And I love all the babies in the room and I want them to stay here. And as long as mom is happy, I'm totally cool with them crying because that's what babies do. So if you're watching on the video and taking your baby out, come on back. If my baby does not sleep well, it is a sign I'm not doing a good job as a mother. Well, that's a setup because babies don't sleep well. It's important to me that others think I'm a good parent. And if I can't calm my baby when she cries, then I'm not a good parent. These beliefs feed into mothers becoming depressed because they are trying to control something that is not controllable. We also know that we can prepare mothers before birth. There's a wonderful Towards Parenthood booklet, and there's a copy of it on the back corner table over here that was developed in Australia. And an intervention was delivered prenatally where mothers went through the booklet and then spoke on the phone for 30 minutes a week with a therapist who went over the key themes in the chapters of the book. And you can see the differences in depression and anxiety and stress and parenting dysfunction among the women who received that guidance during pregnancy and the women who did not. So this might be a way to help prepare mothers for the task they're going to deal with. There's a specific chapter that looks at what am I going to do and what's my partner going to do after the baby comes. So that mom isn't sitting there thinking, why isn't my partner doing the laundry? And the partner is saying, why is this woman staring at me so angrily? But instead, the partner's saying, oh, I'm supposed to do the laundry, I got that. We also can think about providing concrete material support. I mentioned in the introduction about this concept of baby carriers. And this was a study done in 1990 that randomly assigned low-income women in New York to receive a baby carrier or to receive a baby seat. They were shown how to use it, and then they were sort of sent on their way. Well, at a year, the mothers whose babies got a carrier had 83% secure attachment, compared to 38% secure attachment in the group that got an infant seat. So we can foster attachment if moms have the tools to wear their babies. So I wonder, instead of giving, or in addition to giving every mother access to a breast pump, what if every mother got a baby carrier as part of their hospital discharge packet? What might that do for helping mothers to cope with the responsibilities of parenting? In chatting with some folks about the challenges that mothers who are parenting alone face, it's particularly critical if you have to run your household and your baby wants to be held all the time, you need your hands. And we can give people back their arms if we give them a way to carry their babies. There are also very basic material support issues for women living in poverty. This was a study in New Haven of low-income women and whether they had enough diapers for their baby. 27% did not have enough diapers for their baby. And they dealt with that through an agency, through borrowing diapers or money, through other means, or 27% just left the diaper on longer than they would have otherwise because they didn't have enough diapers. So there's some very real concrete issues. WIC doesn't cover diapers. Food stamps don't cover diapers. So there are diaper banks that have been set up, but right now women don't have basic stuff they need to care for their babies, and we need to address that. So then I want to touch on issues in infant feeding. We know that 2 out of 3 women wean earlier than they intended. This was an analysis of data from the infant feeding practices study. So women were asked during pregnancy, how long do you plan to breastfeed? And then they reported when they stopped. 2 out of 3 didn't meet their own goals. And so this is deeply frustrating for women, and for some women really heartbreaking when they had anticipated or planned a particular breastfeeding relationship and it didn't work out. So we are not doing a good job if women set out to breastfeed a particular duration and they're not able to do so. The top reasons weaning for less than a month: I had trouble getting milk flow to start, I didn't have enough milk, breast milk alone didn't satisfy my baby, my nipples were sore, cracked, or bleeding, and my baby had trouble sucking or latching on. These are all very real issues that those folks who work with postpartum mothers know come up all the time. And we have very little evidence to answer these questions. There's some people in the room, I'm looking at Lisa Amir, who've done formative work to begin to provide evidence to answer these questions, but a lot of the time we say, well, there are some herbs that some people think work pretty well, and you can try those, but we don't really have strong evidence. We don't have clinical trials saying, in women dealing with this issue, this intervention helps this proportion of them with these side effects. And we need that if we're going to enable women to meet their goals. There are also tremendous disparities in feeding in this country. If we look at the proportion of particularly American Indian, Alaskan Native, and Black women breastfeed at much lower rates than white women and Asian women and Hispanic women. And that has impact on maternal health as well as on infant health. So we need strategies that provide targeted support to groups at risk of early weaning so that they can get what they need. And those folks who've been at the Breastfeeding and Feminism Conference, we spoke a lot about the fact that the duration of breastfeeding that a woman is able to perform is not a function of her own personal willpower. It is a function of the social constraints and structures that she faces in her life. And so we need policy changes, starting with paid maternity leave, which is necessary, though not sufficient, to enable women to be able to care for their children. So it's also important to recognize that there are disparities in the care that mothers receive based on race, ethnicity. This was looking at data from the Maternity Practices Survey, which looks at delivery of evidence-based breastfeeding care in hospitals. And they looked at the neighborhood racial composition of those hospitals. And they found that women who birthed in hospitals where the majority of the neighborhood was Black residents, or a greater proportion were Black, were less likely to receive support for early initiation of feeding, for limited use of supplements, and for rooming in. So women are getting different care based on who they are, and that's a tremendous problem. So this is just one of the structural issues that is affecting the disparities in breastfeeding in this country. So when we think about next steps for consideration, for infant care, how might we prepare families to cope for the challenges of early parenting? What skills should be shared when and by whom? And I think this when is really important because I vividly remember in preparing for my first birth, I had a stack of books about birth about this high that I read cover to cover, and I had a birth plan, and I had a doula, and I had it all set, and I had not begun to think about what the heck was going to happen after baby came out. And I don't think I could have thought about it because it was such a huge thing to think about the birth. So where can we provide this information and when, so that mothers aren't saying, yeah, I got to get it out first, I can't even go there, but so that they feel prepared. What material support, like diapers, do families need, and how might we provide that better? And then how might we measure the extent to which families' needs are met? For infant feeding, how might we enable families to make truly informed decisions about infant feeding, free of coercion or bias, free of the influence of marketing? What treatments are actually effective for sore nipples, low milk supply, and latch problems? How might we provide more consistent, patient-centered support? How can we address disparities? And how might we quantify a mother's experience of infant feeding? One of the great frustrations in this literature is we talk about exclusive breastfeeding, we talk about any breastfeeding, we talk about breastfeeding intensity, but we don't have a was it good for you question for moms. And until we measure and value mom's experience of feeding, because it is a hell of a lot of time. And if you love it, that's awesome, but if you don't love it, that's a lot of time. How do we make sure that we're enabling women to have a truly positive feeding experience? So I look forward to everybody's input and ideas, and the red light didn't come on. Yay!